are not just cultural fashion statements, but these actually come out of a value system that supports that. And so when we talk about culture, we have to talk about the artifacts and the values and how those two things are connected. Now, oftentimes what happens is that when we see artifacts and they get disconnected from the values, those artifacts become stereotypes. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen stereotypes and I've often wondered, isn't that true about that group of people? Well, yes and no. The problem is what has happened is I see the stereotype or I see the artifact, but I don't understand or have not connected that stereotype or that artifact with its value, right? With the values that support that. And so oftentimes you'll see young people who have plugs or discs in their ears, or they'll have different types of piercings in their nose, and oftentimes they're taking those things from native cultures, not necessarily understanding what the value system is that supports that particular kind of behavior. And so that becomes extremely important. So understanding culture. But what we also must understand is that culture is the adaptation that people have to their context. So culture is a way that people have adapted to their context. So there's a direct relationship between culture and context. Now, context is very interesting because this allows us to understand what kind of pedagogy we need to have to impact culture. Context is the time, the space, it is geographic, it is time, and it is space. It is governmental structures, right? So when we talk about context, what we start to understand is that we have different cultures because geographically people are coming from different zones and areas on the planet. The kinds of things or behaviors that are developed in Iceland may be very different than those behaviors that are created or developed in Venezuela, right? Because geographically there are some very different ways in environments that they have to deal with in those particular places. And so culture is an adaptation to the context. What we also understand that context is about time. So we could be standing in the same place, but had it been 50 years prior or 50 years, past, things would be very different, even in the same geographic region. And so culture is adapting to the time that it's in. What we also know is that the use of space or government, given a particular time or given a particular structure, governments are things that help to dictate what culture is like. In the former Soviet Union, the Soviet Union behaved in a certain kind of way. Post the fall of the Soviet Union, many countries are more democratic or have a socialist leaning. So it's a little different than the communist rule given that the Soviet Union's past. And so when we talk about pedagogy, it's important that we take both the context and the culture in mind. Because if we don't, then we will typically teach from our own culture for the most part, which is a dominant culture. If we want to understand subordinate cultures, we have to have a sense of what their context is, where are those people coming from, and what kind of culture have they developed to deal with the context that they're coming from. And so I don't necessarily agree with the concept in its how it's been demonstrated, but this concept of the culture of poverty, there is a context which is a system of inequality that actually produces a type of culture that people are trying to adapt to the system of inequality, right? And so this culture of poverty, again, I don't necessarily subscribe to all of his pieces, but I certainly can understand, given this balance between context and culture, particularly as an external force, and the need for proper pedagogy, the ways of teaching that actually encourage people to understand the context and the culture. And then lastly, we need to understand that people need to have access to goods, jobs, services, and money. And so how do we encourage our families? How do we encourage our parents to get access to goods, jobs, services, and money in ways that they haven't had it before? Well, one of the things we have to recognize is that the political process has not afforded people often the tools necessary to participate in this great democracy. And so when we have a system that people have not had or been encouraged to participate in, it becomes very daunting to stand up to a teacher or to volunteer in a class, to engage. And so we have to be the ones as professionals to engage parents in a very different way than we have in the past. I gave the example of the probation officers or the criminal justice system applying how they do business a little bit different and actually getting different kinds of results. And so what that may mean to give greater access to parents, it may mean having a sit-down session with parents to find out what their goals are for their kids. Oftentimes when we have parent-teacher conferences, it is teachers telling parents what's going on as opposed to working in a collaboration with parents to find out what it is that parents want for their child. And so giving greater access. Oftentimes parents aren't familiar with what their children are being asked to do in the classroom. And we expect our parents to help our students do their work when the parents can't do the work themselves. Not an indictment on the parents, but the educational process has changed so much that many parents have not been able to keep up. So what that means is, in terms of creating better access for our parents, that we have to give our parents resources that they can turn to make sure that their students are participating. I don't necessarily believe or need to have parents go through education to know what their kids are learning in their classrooms, but I do need the parents to be supportive of what is happening in the classroom. And as a professional, I need to give my parents resources that they can then in turn use to support me in the work that we're doing. And so when we talk about these four clovers, I hope you can start to see how each of these clovers kinds of intertwines and mingles with each other to support an engagement process for parents that allows them to continually have dignity, knowing where they're come from, being proud of who they are, that they're able to get access to power when we're able to decrease those barriers of bias, prejudice, and discrimination. And we're able to increase or become better effective with our pedagogy when we understand the context and the culture that our families are coming from, as we give more access to them by engaging them in an interpersonal process. So oftentimes our processes are very impersonal, but when we start talking about giving access and we have an intrapersonal relationship with our family, with our families, and I know what my families are looking for, I know what their students need, then we have a more equitable system and we start to see some systemic change happening where the organic relationships with parents and families actually start to strengthen to close the educational gaps that our students are facing. And so in this part, I want you to really think about these things, and we'll come back and add some other things, particularly when we start talking about how to become more culturally competent in our classroom settings. My name is Andre Cohen, and I'll see you in the next part. All right? Thanks.